My inspiration for tonight is from, of course, the page a day calendar, as it often is. Back more than a week ago, we had something from Jean-Paul Sartre, which you wouldn't expect me to be quoting, in a Zen talk, but we will see. He said, consciousness is a being, the nature of which is to be conscious of the nothingness of its being. Now that can be, as we'll see, that can be interpreted in a Zen way. It's probably the way that I have it here, but it led me to reflect on just what he seemed to mean by it, and by what some of his contemporary philosophers seem to mean by nothingness. Because I think it's crucial for understanding, where we are in the world today. I was a philosophy major in undergraduate, but even so, we didn't study some of these people I'll be talking about directly. So this is just kind of my opinion, my view from what I could understand, of the influence that they've had. But someone like Jean-Paul who wrote Être et Néant, being and nothingness. So you see, it's right there. Consciousness is being, and the nature of which is to be conscious of the nothingness of its being. The sense, by the 19th century in the West, you had the sense of a void. There was nothing supporting human life and human activity, human thought, human will, that it was on its own, kind of the existentialist kind of thing. We completely lost an experiential sense of something deeper, of God, and a lot of the atheism comes from that, or led to that. So, for example, to act, in the world and to determine yourself through your act, this was very much what I believe Sartre was about. And, it was kind of it was up to you, and of course the you tended to be your ego, your conscious ego. There was even, as I understand, a sense that, your actions and decisions about constructing the world, would conflict with someone else's or be in tension with someone else's, and this is where it eventually led to probably his most famous line, hell is other people, So you had this kind of really self-centered in the worst possible sense. And there's a certain heroic nobility to it. It can seem like, you've got to construct your own life from your own. But it's really sad, and it's really dangerous in a fundamental way. Mike Eigen, a New York psychiatrist who I've quoted before, he also had recently a little thing about. He said the 19th century saw an explosion of literary philosophical images and ideas clustering around an excitatory power. In other words, an energy coming up. But as you see, it's coming from, your own decision. A restless will to live, Schopenhauer, that cannot be satisfied and often results in evil acts to further its aims. The will to power, Nietzsche. And then we'll see something else that he says here too. But so there's this. And that's the other thing. This is, of course, Schopenhauer antedates Sartre, and perhaps is not so well known today. Certainly, if you go out on the street, you have to look for a really long time to find somebody who says, "Oh, sure, I'm a follower of Schopenhauer." So, nonetheless, the kind of attitude behind it is. His major work, as some of you may know, is called Die Welt als Wille und Vorstellung, which means the world as will and imagination. So you hear where you get a German who's talking about will in the 19th century, and you know where that's going. Vorstellung, imagine, whatever you imagine it, whatever you create it to be, actually is based on an offshoot of Kantian thought, where all you know is what you can perceive, and so now here you're actually constructing it, and the thing in itself is not perceptible, which could be a deep kind of thing, but for him, what was in itself, the thing was will. wasn't even intelligence anymore, wasn't even perception or concept. It was pure will. So the restless will to live, for example. And that's what, life is. It was often described by him as human desire is illogical, directionless, fretful, futile, which sounds like the Four Noble Truths in a sense. This human desire is the source of all suffering. And he did study Buddhism, but in that 19th century, nobody really knew what Buddhism was. They had all this kind of false information about it or inadequate information about it. And he really came to his view, as he said later, without just being influenced by it, but saw the similarities. Anyway, his solution to that was asceticism, just extinguish nirvana, extinguish the will to live. So you have this sound and fury, to quote Shakespeare, this restless desire which is illogical and fruitless, and then the only solution is to stop the desire to live at all, which is the way some people have interpreted Buddhism. It's just saying extinguish your will to live, which of course it's not at all. That's just nihilism, as many fortunately have pointed out. That's not what Buddhism says, even though it's what Schopenhauer says. So again, just like as it seems to be in Sartre, you have this void, which is nothing. It's just extinguished. There's no force there. There's certainly nothing benevolent there. Nothing infinite there. It's just this fruitless desire, and then which then becomes your imposition of will, and then becomes, of course, in Nietzsche, as we just heard, the will to power. And he correctly saw that the gods, or God even, as understood in the West up to then, those gods were dying out, the death of God. And it was right. And it's kind of fortunate because some of the piety that we had in the view of God was pretty naive and pretty counterproductive the way it evolved. But there was nothing underneath. It eventually went crazy, as you know, Nietzsche did. There was nothing. There was just your will to power and the Übermensch eventually, and you know where that went. In Nazism, and then Wagner had the same thing, of course. He's often cited, the gods, the Götterdämmerung, the twilight of the gods, and there's just this, whatever is left is just human passion. So it's really sad and really dangerous when that's all you have. So without that substratum, which is, that excitatory power, but then he goes on to say, for some it is a creative power, like Emerson, Wordsworth, Coleridge. So the romantic poets, on the level of feeling, beyond the level of will and intelligence, they're more hopeful. They're a little closer to what we should be talking about here, because it is on the level of feeling, the level of inner experience, that you can experience at its own vibrational level what the nothingness really is, what Buddhist emptiness really is, what the infinity really is. Creative power. So that led me back to a little bit of a reflection on the pre-Socratics. The pre-Socratic school of philosophy, in ancient Greece, where you had these various figures, in what was it, the 8th century BC, 9th century BC, 7th century BC, who saw the substratum, the what was underneath there, in symbolic terms or physical terms. For example, some of you, I'm sure you probably know this. Remember the 4 or 5 elements, the 4 elements that appear throughout the tradition, including in Tibetan Buddhism, especially, for example. So you have earth. Air was seen as by Anaximander as kind of, that's what the basic substratum is. But there's an energy there. There's a creative force there. Air gives life. but interpreted kind of, because it penetrates everywhere, is kind of taken as the kind of the basic element of reality. It seems a little naive. Maybe it was more symbolic, but it's got a profundity to it, certainly on the symbolic level for us. Thales saw it as water. And just think how the image of water has come down through, like the image of the Holy Spirit, the water leaping up to life eternal, or precisely the definition by some of the fathers of the church of God as the boundless, infinite sea of being. So here you have being, which is like an infinite sea, or the Buddhist image of the ocean being the ultimate reality, the ultimate being comparable to an ocean. We're like the waves on the ocean, but the water is always there. So you see, it's got an intriguing history to it, and a power to its imagery. Nobody ever called earth the basic element, probably because it's too coarse and too solid. It's not fluid enough to be everything, the source of everything. It's interesting. You have to go to Heraclitus, I guess, who was a little bit later, to get to fire as everything. And of course, how much is the divine, even in the Judeo-Christian tradition, pictured as fire? The Holy Spirit is fire, and the consuming fire, which can penetrate everywhere and flows everywhere. That was the famous phrase of Heraclitus, "Pantare," everything flows, which is very Buddhist. Everything is in motion, nothing stays the same, everything is impermanent. And there's even, of course, the fifth element in Buddhism, which is space, like ether. That's even more subtle, you might say. That there is a quintessence, a fifth essence, even in Aristotelian philosophy, above the heavens. But what's most fascinating, I think, is Anaximander, who precisely spoke of the boundless, apeiron, in the pre-Socratic philosophy. So you have boundlessness as the boundless, kind of like the empty, full source matrix of everything, the source of everything, which is actually very profound. But there, it's something. It's creative. It's powerful. It's deep. It's cosmic. It's not nothing, the way it became, in more modern times. And so the primitives are actually pretty sophisticated, and the moderns are pretty primitive, in terms of actual experience of reality. So. What I'd like to do is refer to a couple of koans, or from the Zen tradition, that indicate what happens when you really do experience this boundlessness. And of course, the Zen is always talking about the boundless, the experience of absolute reality. But the price of that is precisely that you have to give up, or it's burned out of you, if you want to use that imagery again, all that ego, all that desire, that egotistical desire, all that self-affirmation in the worst possible sense, all that self-determination, all that will, all that power that is emanating just from your ego self. Because that gets totally burned up. Left behind when you have this experience of what real emptiness, what real nothingness is. So in the record for transmitting light, the Denko-roku under Upagupta, it's one of my favorite passages where he speaks about, in this place, this experience, one transcends birth and no birth. One is liberated from mind and no mind. So all these determinate things, it's like water, conforming to its container. So the water which spreads everywhere. There's that imagery again. It's like space, which rests against things. So the ether, space, which is indeterminate but all-inclusive. Though you grasp it, your hands are not filled. Though you search for it, you cannot find a trace for it. So none of that grasping can get it. It's everywhere already. This is the wondrous dharma of the Buddha. When you reach this place, Upagupta does not exist, so-and-so does not arise. You cannot consider them to move or be still, to come or go. It's everything. But even though there is not, other, and self, it's like a sound at the bottom of a stream, or like the endlessness of space. So if you do not experience this one time, then even a million teachings and countless wonderful principles will end up uselessly as the flow of ordinary karmic consciousness, which we're talking about in those philosophers, ordinary karmic consciousness. But when you're instantly awakened, it's a clap of thunder in a clear sky, like a raging fire bursting out on the great earth. Once the thunder roared, it was like the roots of our ears were cut off, and you lost the root of your life. So all of your ordinary sense of existence is transcended and almost violently burned up. The raging fire blazed suddenly, and the Buddhist teachings and the true face of the patriarchal teachers were completely reduced to ashes. It's like John of the Cross talking about how the log gets burned up before it becomes pure flame. And how you have to let go of your own desires and your own possessions and your own sense of being and your own knowledge, all that stuff that was being affirmed a moment ago in those philosophers. The ordinary natures of any number of people are like smash their bodies. We're smashed. Our limitation, our separate sense of self. He left behind traces of emptiness by burning up emptiness. And the final poem in this sequence, house demolished, the person perished, neither inside nor outside. Where can body or mind hide their forms? So all of that gets burned up, but it's not nothing, it's everything. All of that is included. It's beyond mind or no mind or self or no self, or anything like that. It's all inclusive, and it's like a clap of thunder. It's a wonderful, wonderful experience. And then, of course, I thought of the great koan mu, the first one of the Mamonkan, which practically everybody knows, where Joshu is asked, does a dog have Buddha nature? And he says, woo! Which means no. Which is, of course, not denying that on a certain level Buddha's dog has Buddha nature like everything else does, but that in the end it's no! Nothing specific, nothing separate, nothing you can conceptualize or imagine, none of that stuff. It's just none of that. It's like what John of the Cross says, nada, 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 nada. Nothing, 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 which doesn't mean nothing. It means everything, but that's why it has to be nothing. No thing. So Shibayama has some great commentary on this. All the emotions are exhausted. All the intellect has come to its extremity. There's not an inch for the discrimination to enter. This is the state of utmost spiritual intensification. The koan compares it to, all your pores, all your bones being activated, being poured into this. He says it's like swallowing a red-hot iron ball, everything is transformed and everything is, when it is hot, the whole universe is nothing but the heat. When you see it is just one pure act of seeing. No room for any thought to come in. So this is, no trace of it is, you are thoroughly lucid and transparent like a crystal. Subject and object, in and out, being and non-being are just one. Rinzai described this state, the whole universe is sheer darkness. There's nothing, no thing. Hakuin, the great Japanese master, said, it was like sitting in an ice cave 1,000,000 miles thick. So that's a little different from fire, but sitting in an ice cave 1,000,000 miles thick. This is the moment when I and the world are both altogether gone, or one, if you will, gone, as separate, as discernible. This is exactly the moment when one's discriminating mind is emptied and cast away, when one is in the abyss of absolute mu. The inexpressible moment comes upon him. the moment when Mu is awakened to Mu. He is revived as the self of no self. At this mysterious moment, the person is like a dumb person who has had a wonderful dream. He's fully aware, but no words can express it. The absolute nothingness, capital letters, the absolute nothingness is awakened to itself. This is the moment of realization when subject-object opposition is altogether transcended. So he goes on, in that same vein. Speaks about the true self, the great doubt going beyond, everything that you know. The great death he speaks of here, and all that stuff has to die. And your true self, capital T, capital S, he mentions here. That's what we truly discover. Beyond Buddha, beyond everything. And what serene life with perfect freedom, the spiritual freedom of the one who has attained religious peace. That's what he says. So this is immensely rich and powerful. It's where we discover, this realm that we discover. It's like a true matrix. This void, this emptiness, is like a womb of the universe. I like to compare it now to a black hole. Which just consumes everything, but is everything. And now some scientists, even Stephen Hawking, were speculating, well, everything comes out somehow on the other side, or it's like a womb, So it's really fascinating. I think that's a very good image for it's sheer darkness. The whole universe is sheer darkness, we just heard, in a black hole, and yet it's maybe the source of another universe on the other side. That it's dynamic emptiness, as Masao Abe said, dynamic shunyata. It's powerful. It's not just the eraser of the will to live. It's the ultimate life at this level. So unless we recover the sense of the nothingness that is fullness, we're going to be left with the nothingness that only leaves us with the will to power, because there's nothing else. And you see where that's brought us. So, because they have nothing left, whereas we have nothing left.